It's been a little bit since we've had a chance to do a crochet and chat, knit and chat, stitch and chat, craft and chat, do whatever you want in the background chat. And I thought, what better weekend than Easter weekend to have a chat about my journey with faith, and maybe you have gone through something similar, and just kind of have a chance to connect since we haven't done that in a little while. Today, I'm just working on another dishcloth because I still have plenty of this cotton yarn left over, and I could still use a few more little dishcloths and whatever. This is the Sugar and Cream in the colorway Coral Seas Ombre. And I do really like this, and I'm just doing a simple linen stitch, so nothing super fancy, something relatively mindless that I can work on while we chat. And if this is your first time hanging out here, hi, my name is Holly from Stitch is Gonna Stitch here in Northeast Ohio, and I am a cat mom, so you may see someone come and go. We don't know what's going to happen during these stitch and chats. Thinking back on my journey with faith and the time that I did not believe, actually. So, like many people, I grew up in a household that went to church, and in my case, I was growing up Catholic, did the whole communion, the CCD, Sunday classes, all of that sort of stuff. And in high school, just because there was a lot going on health-wise with my mom, I never got around to getting confirmed or anything like that. And even as a young adult, I just kept putting it off. And now I'm a middle-aged adult, and I don't know that I necessarily feel that I don't know, it's necessary to be confirmed, but I'm curious to hear your thoughts if you've gone through confirmation. I wanted to do it more or less because I knew my grandmother would have loved that I got confirmed. She actually was originally Lutheran. She grew up Lutheran and converted to Catholicism. And I don't know if that was necessarily for my grandfather or not to get married. If I remember correctly, she did it on her own just because she wanted to. And I thought that was really interesting. And that's probably part of why I don't know necessarily where I fall on needing to be confirmed. It was just something I never got around to. It's quite a commitment if you aren't aware or you're not Catholic. It is, if I remember correctly, it is weeks of class leading up to Easter. In fact, one of my friends just got she converted. So she did like everything, the whole baptism, confirmation, all of that sort of stuff this weekend, actually. So that was really awesome. And of course, I'm very happy for her. So anyway, I never got confirmed. And like many people in their 20s, it just wasn't really a priority, unfortunately, to, think about my faith or anything like that. I will say I grew up, thinking I had a pretty strong faith in God and, the Catholic Church. And I do enjoy a good Catholic service and all of the rituals and everything. I have gone to quite a number of other services. Actually, that's one of the things I took advantage of in boot camp, was that on every single Sunday, you had the option to go to whichever service you wanted. So I made a point of wanting to go and check out all the different faiths, and like Baptist. I have been to Lutheran services before, even as a kid, if I was like sleeping over at a friend's house or something. I can't remember what all, sects of Christianity I had gone to in boot camp, but I feel like I did a pretty good rotation just to get a feel for the services. And I do, Lutheran, I will say, is a pretty good service because, it's kind of like Catholic light. A lot of people will say it that way. But overall, I do most prefer a Catholic service. However, look at that. I already found a mistake. Pick an easy stitch pattern, and during a chat session, I'm still going to mess it up because that's what happens sometimes. It's more about the connection and less about the, perfection of making sure your project is, in tip-top shape. So it's not a big deal. I expected that might happen. And truthfully, I can make mistakes without talking to you. So there's that. Fast forward into my early 20s, I had been, in a few relationships, as one young adult might do. I had lived with someone, which I will never do again before getting married, but that's another whole tangent. After that breakup, I was living with my stepsister and helping her out with some stuff, and it was just a good place to stay without feeling like I was going home. So at that time, it felt like a good place to help her out and kind of have a little bit of, independence in some sense, because moving home, when you're in your early 20s feels kind of sucky. Like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I, failed, even though it was really just, a transition in my life. And really, it's not that big of a deal in hindsight. But of course, back then I was like anything but moving home. And so it was nice to connect with one of my stepsisters and have that time together. And I remember one evening, I think probably the first month I had moved in, I want to say it was around January, and a friend of hers had stopped over. Didn't really think that much of it or anything like that. And at that time, my stepsister was struggling with finances, and, let's just say she had to update her phone number with my phone number. Things happen when you're young and money is tight. So the very next day, I get a call from him, and I said, oh, you know what? I'm not home from work yet. Do you want me to have her call you once I get home? And turns out he was calling for me, which I was not expecting at all. Long story short, almost made a mistake again. So we started dating for a little while. I definitely fell absolutely in love with him. And we decided we needed to be apart for a little bit. He had some things he needed to work out. I was still working out my own stuff after the breakup and everything of this, the previous relationship. I don't think I was ready, other than, I just knew I really, really deeply cared about him. And so eventually, I don't remember exactly how long had gone by. We got back in touch, started hanging out again, and I know he was in a place in his life where he was getting ready to move to New York to kind of, again, we're still figuring ourselves out, as many 20-something-year-olds would do. I believe I was about 22 at the time, and he was either 29 or had just turned 30. I don't remember. This was actually in the interim that we had been apart. I was in another relationship, so I was probably actually closer to 23, 24 at this point. And he might have been in his early 30s. So another failed relationship, and, he was like, well, do you want me to stay back from New York? And I just didn't feel good about, if someone wanted to do something for their own personal growth, I didn't want to be the reason to hold someone back. It had sounded like he was really looking forward to it. And I said, well, I'm not in a place to start dating again. And I think you should go, because I don't want you to have any regrets whatsoever. And so he did. And I eventually, got a house, not this one, a different house. I was still working a lot. I ended up working night shift of all things, because, in that interim relationship, that person, he was a night shift person, and somehow I was stupid and I did the thing of, sure, I'll switch to night shift so we can be both on the same shift, even though I'm miserable the whole time and like all the stuff you shouldn't do. But I did it anyway, against all of my better judgment. And there were a few times where we kind of tried to hang out and it just wasn't working, and I still had a lot going on. I was also struggling now myself quite a bit financially. I bit off quite a bit more than I could chew for the house and everything. And I'm the kind of person where that stuff is like super embarrassing to me. And like, I tend to hide that kind of stuff, especially like, I'm trying to like impress this guy and seem like I have all my stuff together. And, my bills are behind, stuff's getting turned off. I'm getting all the late notices, all the things. Eventually decided to take over an apartment that someone from work was moving out of, because I knew I was at that point where I was going to lose the house because it was way more than I should have ever been approved for. This was back in like '06 to '08-ish. So those of you that were around then and remember what that was like, it was not a good time. I had the bait and switch interest rates and all that other, like so many things that, you know, when you're 23 and you're like, I can do this. And your parents are like, are you sure? And then you're like, of course I am. But, you know, you got to make your own mistakes. And so I was transitioning from the house to an apartment and, you know, embarrassed and not wanting to say any of these things and still trying to recover from it. My hours were getting cut at work, all of the things. I think I even picked up second jobs at that point. Actually, I think I worked at Joann's one season and realized that is not the place for someone like me to actually, you know, make money because I would end up spending it right there in the store. But I went and got other part-time jobs and everything just to try to make ends meet. Just a lot was going on in my life, and he did give me the time to go ahead and try to get my life together. And I don't know that he knew exactly the extent of what was going on. So he eventually also was kind of, you know, doing his own thing, found a roommate with an apartment also. So we kind of got a little bit out of touch, and a few more years go by. And I'm like, you know, I know one of the things I struggled with the most was he really, really, really loved kids. And I was struggling because I wasn't so sure I wanted to have kids. And especially seeing, you know, other women my age, my friends or coworkers or whatever, going through the whole, they felt like they needed to have kids and their husbands were just not helping at all. So that terrified me to no end that I could potentially be in that position of feeling like I'm doing this all by myself. I don't know what I'm doing. It's absolutely, to me, terrifying to have kids. So those of you who are good moms or dads, I mean, congratulations, because I don't know. So anyway, at one point I did a lot of soul searching and I was like, you know what? Here's the thing. He loved kids so much that I knew he would have been an amazing dad, and I was being ridiculous. And, you know, just because I was seeing some of these other dynamics and things in other relationships didn't mean that that was going to necessarily be my experience. So I was like, okay, I think I reached out on like MySpace or something and didn't hear anything for a while. And was it his personal MySpace? I feel like maybe it was, but also he was part of a band that I don't remember exactly if they also had their own MySpace page or anything like that. But eventually one of the band members reached out to me and said, I am so sorry, but, you know, he has passed. And that just sent me into a tailspin because I truly loved this man. I was very upset at myself for, you know, some of the silly reasons that I was not with him at certain times or things that I didn't want to share with him. Sorry, I'm crocheting my hair into this. Hi, Madeline. I know, you're so lovely. I don't know if you guys can, here's her little tail. She's just been a love bombie. I thought she was going to be napping for a little bit, but here she, oh yeah, she's done already. So I was mad at myself. I was mad at every time that we argued over something stupid, especially when I really think about it, how many times I knew I was being stupid or high-strung or just completely ungrateful. She really loves the tripod right now, so I apologize if that really bothers you. So that really put me into a bad place for a while, as you can imagine, all of the emotions and everything. And, you know, I think I was about 25 or 26 at this point, so certainly not something anybody at that age should ever go through, is losing someone that is either their life partner or that they think is going to be their life partner, or, someone that they truly love, whatever the case is. And after, I would say about the first roughly year or so, I was just in an absolute state of like shock and disbelief. And after that, I would say about the next year following, I was a raging bitch. And I won't even try to hide that. I decided I don't know, or I don't know if I believe in God, because what kind of God does stuff like that? He's not playing fair. And if God's not playing fair, why should I play fair? Maybe there's not a God. All of those faith crumbling things, faith testing thoughts. And this went on for a while. I was a very mean-spirited person. I wish I could at least apologize to some of the people who I affected, I'm sure, in some way, but unfortunately, it's just part of life. Sometimes we don't get that, we don't necessarily get to absolve our guilt and things like that. For a few years after, even though I had kind of calmed down and I was like, I need to be more grateful, that was the biggest lesson, most of all, was just feeling more grateful for the people around me and recognizing when someone treats me like absolute gold and not treating them like crap. And not to say that I necessarily treated him like crap. I just know that there's times I could have handled things better, and just overall just been a much more appreciative person. And, that is often, unfortunately, a lesson in your early 20s, is that we don't always appreciate these sorts of things in general, even if you don't necessarily go through something this big. But I would say for another number of years, I didn't really, put much into faith. I did start attending a Church of Christ with a friend who, and like, it's nice, and I didn't necessarily take issue with it or anything. And I always like hearing, I liked hearing scripture and the lessons within scripture. So even if you're someone who doesn't believe in God yourself still, or will never believe in God, or you think the Bible is just a bunch of like hokey fables, to me, it's like, okay, but there's a lot of good moral stories in there that we can learn from, even if you want to step back and think of it that way. So I still appreciated going from time to time. It was always a good time, the community, the fellowship, all of that sort of stuff. And I just feel like I wasn't fully convinced. And I remember also someone had said something to the effect of, in reference to Brian, after he passed, this was a little ways off later, I was still very much in grief mode, but they had said, well, God needs him more than you need him. Like, there was some sort of special something about Brian that God needed him more than I did. And that can still hurt and also be true at the same time. So it was sort of meant to be comforting. And so that was also kind of playing into the whole, well, God's not playing fair. And I know Brian was also not a believer, believe it or not. And at a time back when we were together, I was. So this is really, I don't know. And I remember specifically, I made a comment about somehow I couldn't wrap my head around something with him being gone. And his aunt just like stopped dead and was like, that's what he used to say about God, is that he couldn't wrap his head around it, like the concept of God. And I actually never knew that part because we had never really gone that deep. I just went, okay, you don't believe in God. I'm not someone who's going to push or anything like that. Everyone has their own journey or set of beliefs. And so that was kind of interesting. And eventually at some point, I was really doing a lot of digging and soul searching. And when I thought about, okay, well, let's just say God needs Brian more than I need Brian, or there's some sort of special angel work, whatever you want to frame it as, there was something about me that couldn't understand him just completely being gone, because he was just so full of life and energy. And also, then I thought about it in a way of, I can't imagine that he's just not here. And for him to still be around, that means he's got to be in some sort of afterlife heaven. And then there would have to be a God in order for that to be the case. And it really came really full circle of, I could not actually understand a world where there was not a heaven that he is in right now. Does that make sense? And this is years ago, obviously. This is still probably like pre-2010-ish. So that around that area of time. So it's been quite a bit. I've had that thought of, I cannot understand, particularly someone who was 32 at the time of passing, just disappearing and not having that heaven experience. And of course, as you know, you get older and you lose grandparents, aunts, other people in your life. Even a friend last year was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer in late fall. And it was really even interesting to see his journey, because I don't know if he was ever not a believer, but he didn't really seem that religious or spiritual. And let me tell you, I was still kind of I'm still going through my reinforcing my faith. I'd since been rebaptized and everything, because I kind of felt like I needed to watch that period of not being a believer out of my life and start fresh. So I felt like that was something that was important to me. But my friend Brett got diagnosed, and I remember talking to him and saying, you know, this is the time where you need to get rid of all of, or as much of the negative influences as humanly possible. And I thought he was still kind of like not really a true, I don't want to say not a true believer in God, but I said, miracles can still happen. You never know. And he kind of showed that he was going through his own faith journey, I guess, especially in the last year or so, because, it's not like he just went into stage 4 randomly. He had been sick for some time, and it just got to a point where they said, well, you're in stage 4. It's the best you have is a year with chemo, which, he had his time to go ahead and put his affairs in order and have that faith journey for himself. And he chose not to do the whole, still be sick and miserable and chemotherapy and all the things for the next year and still not have that great of a quality of life. He is no longer with us. And I'm still in that place of, I have to believe that he has a greater purpose and is fulfilling his greater purpose in his, afterlife or heavenly experience. I was not expecting to get this emotional. I thought I could get through all of this. I thought I would have started earlier if I was going to get started. So I thought I had it under control there. So that's just been my experience with faith and just feeling like I can still believe in God. I don't know necessarily if I feel like I belong to a particular religion or, part of Christianity, or if I'm sort of an agnostic or general Christian. I don't know what that looks like. I know my journey is not over at all. I know my faith gets tested every single time, I lose a furry friend, because that is probably, the worst part of life and being a pet owner is those last moments with our pets. But at least now I know I have the faith and the strength of walking with God, walking with Jesus, all those sorts of things, and being able to have that faith. And for anyone who happens to still be watching this and still doesn't believe, I'm absolutely not trying to convert you. And if you're still cynical or you remain cynical, or maybe it's not cynical, maybe it's just coming from a place of, in your logical mind, there being a greater power that we call God, Jesus, Mary, whatever the case is, I know there's other religions, Allah, anything like that, and you still feel like God does not exist or that you're an absolute atheist and that's never going to change, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what I believe. It doesn't matter what you believe. One of us is going to be wrong at the end of our lives, and we don't know which one that's going to be. But having that faith while we're here on earth, I think, is what makes life a little bit more, I don't want to say special or magical in the sense of like God is magic, but kind of he is, because in my mind, like there are miracles that happen. I know absolutely without a doubt in my mind, if that would have been God's choice to, have this miracle where Brett would have healed completely and had, a wonderful life and continued on, that could have absolutely happened. We hear stories about stuff like that all the time, and I don't have any other explanation. I cannot imagine a world where my loved ones pass and they just cease to exist completely. Now, I know there's other religions that believe in reincarnation, and maybe you're also right. Someone here is right. A lot of us may be wrong. I don't know. I just know that having a faith in God and the values that have been instilled on me and all of the, lessons and tales in the Bible, I feel like that makes my experience here on earth far richer than I could ever imagine. And I would love to hear your thoughts and what you believe, what you don't believe. If you have a similar story and you would like to share it down in the comments, I would love to read and respond to them. As always, thank you so much. Madeline says, thanks for watching. And as always, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I didn't make a ton of progress on this. That's not the point of these. The point of these is to connect. And especially here on this Easter Sunday, I wish you all the blessings, and I cannot wait to visit with you in the next one. Bye.